Next on Eye on Politics, special session. State lawmakers prepare to meet next week in their third special legislative session this year to tackle school choice and potentially teacher raises. Southern border close up. Our Ken Molestina went to El Paso, which has recently experienced an uptick in the number of migrants crossing into Texas. Speaker meltdown. Kevin McCarthy ousted as Speaker in the U.S. House. We'll speak with a Republican and Democratic member of Congress from North Texas about what's next. I'm Jack Fink. Get your fix for Texas politics. Eye on Politics on CBS News Texas starts right now. Hello and welcome. We begin with the upcoming third special legislative session, which starts October 9th. Governor Greg Abbott notified the Lieutenant Governor and Speaker of the House that the session starts at 1 p.m. Monday. He didn't specify the topics, but has said that he will include school choice. Raises for teachers will also likely be included in the call. The governor is pushing lawmakers to approve taxpayer-funded education savings accounts, or vouchers, so some public school students can go to private or religious schools instead. We spoke with Republican State Representative Brian Harrison of Waxahachie and Democratic State Representative Retta Bowers of Garland, who are on opposite sides of this issue.
The voucher itself will not be enough for a family to provide a private school education. And one of my school districts, it has choice of school already. So this is not about choice. It is, to me, about defunding public education. And I do believe when we look at our education system here in Texas, we have to fund it properly.
For my colleagues in the Texas House who, for whatever reason, have historically chosen to go in with the liberal special interests of liberal teacher unions, you've got a choice. You can stand with teachers, parents, students, deliver education freedom, or continue following the liberal teacher unions who oppose every conservative value that we have. For me, the choice is clear. And if in 2023, I think the best way to prove that somebody's a conservative, that you're a conservative, if you're an elected Republican, is to pass bold, universal school choice. And I'm cautiously optimistic that we're going to get that done.
Regarding education, Steve Pickett spoke with Dallas ISD's superintendent about not only school choice, but another concern of hers, the state's accountability standards for school districts.
Short story, tell me what the rules are before the game begins.
Stephanie Elizalde, the superintendent of Dallas schools, is not leading a legal fight against the state, claiming a rigged system to manipulate Texas's grading of public school systems. She's joining that fight.
Question number one.
Dallas ISD is partnered now with more than a dozen school systems, from Crowley to Frisco, from Richardson to Prosper, to legally challenge the TEA's slated accountability plan that could lower grades for the state's school districts. Dallas schools currently have a B rating, but for Elizalde and others, a rating change smacks of another agenda. The governor has called for a special session on funding an education voucher plan. He calls it school choice. Elizalde calls it using public tax dollars to finance private programs. And changing a school district's rating or grade smacks of political manipulation.
Interesting timing, wherein this change happens to be occurring when the political landscape, from a very, albeit loud, but very few, but loud, I consider anti-public school voices.
The head of the TEA has said this is simply about raising standards. Ms. Elizalde says, how do you raise standards if you divest from public schools and invest that money in private ones under the auspices of vouchers? In Dallas, Steve Pickett, CBS News Texas.
Now to the historic week in Congress, where a small number of Republicans and Democrats ousted House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. It's the first time ever that a speaker lost his leadership position. We spoke with two members of Congress in opposite parties from North Texas about what happened and what may come next.
I didn't want to get caught up in the personality cult traps that we have in Washington, D.C. We need to do our job. We need to pass the appropriations bills
Congressman Keith Self of McKinney explains why he voted against the motion by fellow Republican Matt Gaetz to remove Speaker Kevin McCarthy. 7 other Republicans, along with all Democrats, voted to oust McCarthy. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett of Dallas was one of them.
We just want an honest broker. Even if you're telling us we're not going to do anything, at least be honest about it. And we couldn't find that in McCarthy.
Now, House Majority Leader Steve Scalise of Louisiana on the left, House Judiciary Committee Chair Jim Jordan of Ohio in the center of your screen have announced they're running for Speaker. And Kevin Hern of Oklahoma on the right has said he's planning to do so.
We've got a lot of talented people in the Republican Party. We are holding our powder dry. I'm holding my powder dry because I want to see who actually gets in. I mean, we're early in this. We're one day into this.
Do you think that this change in leadership is going to help Democrats or hurt Democrats?
I think that we net nothing. I don't think it's a net gain. I don't think it's a net loss.
Some Republicans have said they want to change the current rule, which allows a single member to call for a motion to vacate the chair and force a vote to do away with the Speaker.
I know that Matt Gaetz is an easy target and everyone's blaming Matt Gaetz, or they're blaming the 8, or even the Republicans want to blame the Democrats. But at the end of the day, this is a rule that was changed by McCarthy.
Do you think the rules need to change for the next Speaker so that whoever that next Speaker is can't be so easily removed as Speaker McCarthy was this time?
I will tell you, I don't think it ought to change. I think it is what this country was started with, and I think it has served us well. I see no reason to change it.
Republican presidential candidate Tim Scott came to Dallas this week to meet with Mayor Eric Johnson. It took place 10 days after the mayor announced in a Wall Street Journal op-ed that he is switching parties from being a Democrat to a Republican. The mayor showed Senator Scott Clyde Warren Park, and the two had lunch. Johnson didn't have much to say to reporters who had a lot of questions about his decision.
You got a man running for president of the United States back there. You ought to be asking him questions.
We're going to ask him, but you're now designated as a Republican, so why are you here today?
Mayor, why are you not answering questions about this?
Can you talk about
the reason why you're not talking about this?
So, thank you very much for being here.
But
Can you talk about it? You ought to be asking Mr. Scott about his campaign for
But you're not going to talk to us about your designation
over a week since you switched from GOP and you're not talking about it.
Scott explained his visit with the mayor this way.
I'm here because had an opportunity to have lunch with the mayor. He and I have been talking for a number of months, a couple of years on and off, but certainly his announcement was a pleasant one that I think is helpful for the country. He's joined the Republican Party because he felt like he was no longer welcomed where he was because he thought there was a better path forward. So we're thankful for that.
He did not have any other public events in Dallas this week. Scott is tied for 6th place with former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie nationally in the Real Clear Politics average of polls in the Republican presidential primary. Another issue coming up at next week's special legislative session will be Texas's efforts to keep migrants from crossing into the state. Ken Molestina went to El Paso last week and he spoke with migrants about their journeys and their plans.
At its peak last weekend, El Paso's border had 2,000 illegal crossings in just one day. The most recent numbers from Customs and Border Protection show it's now down by a third. Border officials credit what they're calling mirrored enforcement with Mexican authorities for the small drop. In fact, our drone video in one stretch of the border showed a lot fewer migrants making it across. Migrants advocates we spoke with call this a temporary and inhumane fix.
What problems do you see with this type of an effort?
Well, I think there's a number of problems. The first one is that these kind of solutions do not recognize the real problem, which is the reasons why migrants are being displaced in Mexico, not only in Central America, but in Mexico and Venezuela and Central America, because of violence, because of economic distress. So this enforcement-only approach, like this deportation approach, don't resolve anything.
Fernando Garcia is the director of the Border Network for Human Rights.
So for me, what is happening today is the United States border has been expanded to southern Mexico. Now the whole Mexico is part of the U.S. border strategy.
He's against Mexican authorities setting up checkpoints, detaining and deporting migrants south of the border. In a statement, CBP's Commissioner Troy Miller stated the importance of reiterating the need for coordinated engagement to include mirrored patrols with local Mexican law enforcement agencies.
Do you think migrants are going to find a new way to get here?
Sí.
Yes, says Venezuelan asylum seeker Elise Sousa. She showed us images of her trek north and says she encountered so much extortion from Mexican authorities that this new enforcement south of the border could be avoided if you pay off officials.
Dice usted que los inmigrantes algunas veces pagan una extorsión para llegar. You say sometimes they have to pay extortion fees to get here?
Sí, hay muchos inmigrantes que...
She says the authorities extort people into paying money in order to get to the next leg in their journey. She was brought to tears just thinking about what she had to endure to get here. Meanwhile, Garcia says the solution lies in new policies to welcome asylum seekers like Sousa, not binational militaristic enforcement of the border.
Let's figure out who is fleeing from violence, give them a solution. Let's figure out who's looking for a job that we need in the United States. So let's find a way to bring those workers legally.
And Ken Molestina joins us now. And Ken, you not only went to the border in El Paso, but you live there, you work there. And so I'm wondering, put us in perspective, if you will. How did what you saw this time compare to what you had seen when you worked and lived there?
Well, you know, working and living there, and this was years ago, we know that this has always been sort of an issue of people crossing over the border illegally, but it was unlike anything I had seen in the years that I lived there. The volume of it and the sort of the resources, and was seeing how the city's resources, which usually are adequate enough to deal with this kind of a situation, to see them depleted the way that they were, which meant that people had to spend the night out in the streets, and to see sort of this tension between the local and the state government there of how they're going to deal with this. That's something that we'd never seen before. So, you know, they're taking it day by day. They're taking it, you know, one mass at a time, because really that's all they can do right now.
And so I'm wondering, what has been the impact when you see the number of migrants and all that, as far as, I mean, are people just out on the streets? I mean, certainly we've seen, you know, we saw what was in your story, but when you look at New York City, for example, that gets daily attention.
Sure.
But in El Paso, it really doesn't. So I'm wondering about that.
Yeah, so what you saw is something that's happening every single day here. The hope is that when the apprehensions at the border start to go down, that the spillover, because what you're seeing is the back end of the process, is what happens to these folks after they're apprehended, arrested, processed, and then released. And then they end up on the streets in El Paso as they wait to go to other cities. So, you know, the hope is that if the apprehensions at the border start to go down, that will go down as well. But to your point, I mean, it's something that right now has a lot of people worried because I think as of last check yesterday, some 7,000 people or close to 7,000 people are still in detention in El Paso. These are people that are going to be destined for those streets unless they have a plan already. So that gives you an idea of just sort of the flow that's coming. So this isn't an issue that I think people in El Paso think is going to be resolved anytime soon. Furthermore, they believe that more people will come. We know that Mexico has stepped up some of their patrols and what they're calling mirrored patrols, but you know, folks are still going to find a way to get here. When I speak to the migrants, they say what we're fleeing are desperate situations, so desperate in fact that no one's thinking of not coming or having second thoughts. The people who are committing to making the trek to cross into the U.S. illegally, they're still coming, and they're coming in masses.
And what is the desperation? Is it fear of violence, or is it more economic? There are no jobs, and that's what's, you know,
violence is the big one. And you know, the thing about this, Jack, when you talk about migration, the elements that are fueling this recent sort of surge, if you want to call it that, or crisis is a better word that we're seeing. The things that are fueling it are the same things that have always fueled migration since humans have been around. You know, if there's political instability, famine, natural disasters, all these kinds of things are happening, and they're happening all at the same time. In the case of Venezuela, which seems to be the largest producer of migrants currently, they are fleeing political instability. They're fleeing violence and just an absolutely, you know, catastrophic economy there that has just, you know, people are starving there. and there is a lot of political persecution that is going on, and a lot of the folks that are coming from Venezuela all cite those three as claims, as to reasons as to why they believe they will qualify for an asylum claim here in the U.S. So for them, they say it's worth to make the trek to get here and start that asylum process.
Now, one thing that we should mention is that just this week now, we are hearing from the U.S. Department of Homeland Security that Secretary Mayorkas has just filed a request, an urgent request, to now resume building of the wall, this in Starr County down in the Rio Grande Valley.
Yes.
That's very interesting considering the president's position since even before he was elected was he was against walls.
This has shocked a lot of people, as you would imagine. You're calling it interesting. I'm reading and hearing from people today who say they're absolutely shocked because it's an about face, essentially.
Yeah.
This is not something that the Biden administration had hinted at earlier that they would do this, so it's taking a lot of people by surprise. In addition, it's also drawn a lot of concern from environmentalists, because a lot of this, previously their big case was that this stretch of the wall would be built in areas that would be affected environmentally. There's wildlife down there. There are water streams down there that have been protected for years, for decades. All of that is at jeopardy now. So the idea now that the Biden administration is going to lift some regulations that were in place to stop the border wall from continuing to be built, the idea that they're going to lift that to allow it to be continued has a lot of people scratching their heads right now.
But it does go to the point of just how big of an issue this is, right? I mean, this is not something. I mean, this is 2 years in a row that we've seen more than 2 million people try to get into the country.
Yes.
And not to mention all the gotaways.
Right.
And so here you are in Starr County, right in the middle of RGV, where this was something that the secretary called it presently an acute and immediate need to construct physical barriers. So for him to say that, reversing Biden administration policy just shows about the problem, right?
I think it's a clear acknowledgement that there is a problem right now and that the current legislation on the books isn't doing enough to help with the situation. So therefore, the idea of continuing to build a wall, physical structures, maybe that's the way that they're going now. But yes, to me, it's a clear indicator that there has been a shift in thought and a clear admission to me from the Biden administration that they need to step up and do something because these numbers are becoming overwhelming.
And my last question, you talked a little bit about it before, and that was the fact that Mexico has changed its policy.
Yes.
And so talk to me a little bit about that. The people you spoke with down there, do they think that will make a difference?
No, because they say, again, the reason why people are fleeing these countries, you're still not addressing that. At the core of this are still the factors of why people are leaving, which is they're fleeing violence, they're economic depression, and in some cases even disasters from Mother Nature, natural disasters. These are all things, again, that are still happening, and the idea of a mirrored patrol in Mexico does not address any of that. It's also become a point of criticism for so many migrant advocates who say migrants who are fleeing these elements have the right to reach the United States, however they do it, and seek asylum and file an asylum claim. They're saying it is inhumane for our Mexican counterparts, the officials in Mexico, to have their own, to detain people down there, to have checkpoints. They're also practicing their own deportations of migrants that are coming through Mexico. People forget, Mexico has its own immigration laws as well, that they are now stepping up to enforce. So yeah, critics of the mirrored enforcement, as it's being called, or the mirrored patrols, they're not in favor of it either, but we are seeing it for the first time. Mexican authorities are stepping up to try and do something, and they're sort of working hand in hand with CBP and with customs officials to try and get a grip on this. And again, another indicator that really the numbers are just that overwhelming.
Well, I want to thank you, Ken, very much for your insight about your visit down to El Paso.
You got it, Jack.
Coming up on Eye on Politics, our interviews with Republican Congressman Keith Self of McKinney and Democratic Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett about the fall of Speaker Kevin McCarthy and what's next. And then later, Democratic State Representative Retta Bowers of Garland is running for the soon-to-be-open 32nd congressional seat. Why she's running and her top priorities when Eye on Politics comes right back. Welcome back. For the first time ever, a Speaker of the U.S. House has been ousted. 8 Republicans led the process of kicking Kevin McCarthy out of power. As Republicans who control the House figure out who their new leader will be, we spoke with Republican Congressman Keith Self of McKinney about McCarthy's downfall and who could replace him.
We have got to continue to pass our appropriations bills. We're already late. We're under a continuing resolution right now, and we have got to continue to fund the government. So I didn't want to get caught up in the personality cult traps that we have in Washington, D.C. We need to do our job. We need to pass the appropriations bills because we're under a CR right now, continuing resolution for, 40 days left in it? So we're going to go through this shutdown charade again in 40 days. So we need to pass our appropriations bills. Now, the House has passed 70% of the funding for the federal government for the next year. The Senate has not taken up a single bill. And so we've got to get through the 7 remaining bills. We've got to get them over to the Senate so that we can fund this government so we don't have another CR shutdown charade here in about 40 days. That's just a couple of days before Thanksgiving. Now, that's the worst timing I can think of to have any discussion about a government shutdown.
Let me ask you, and I do want to ask you about that, but does all of this, the drama over the speakership make it seem as if Republicans can't govern?
Well, no, this is messy. It's democracy. But the real chaos is in the Biden administration. Look at our southern border. We're now over 10,000 people coming across our southern border every day now. Look at the inflation that our citizens, our families are putting up with, 20% cut in their standard of living today. The chaos is in the Biden administration. This is a short term. We're going to find a speaker, and I believe that the next speaker will have an excellent opportunity to pull the Republicans together, because there's nothing like a crisis to bring us together to say, yeah, we got to work together. We've got to get this done, even though our majority is narrow.
So there have been a number of people mentioned as, candidates for Speaker. You've got Majority Leader Steve Scalise, the House Judiciary Committee Chairman Jim Jordan, Kevin Hern from Oklahoma, who's chair of the Republican Study Committee, Tom Emmer, the Majority Whip, and 2 members of Congress from Texas that I've seen mentioned, Roger Williams from North Texas and Chip Roy from Central Texas. So who do you like?
Well, at the Texas delegation lunch, the Republicans today, we heard from several of those. They all made very compelling cases. We've got a lot of talented people in the Republican Party. We are holding our powder dry. I'm holding my powder dry because I want to see who actually gets in. We're early in this. We're 1 day into this. And I want to see who gets in. I want to hear their cases. But we need a person that can bring the conference together. And again, I think it's an excellent opportunity for whoever is made speaker to do that, because we now realize we have got to stand against the Biden administration as a whole. So I'm pretty optimistic that we will put this behind us fairly soon. And again, back to those appropriation bills, we've got to fund the government. I would like to see us pass those bills in the next 40 days. The time we've got left before the next so-called shutdown, which is really only a temporary pause in non-essential services. Jack, when they talk about a shutdown, it's only 20% of the government. And frankly, we've already funded 70% of the government with our bills. I asked the Senate, take it up. Let's get it done.
I did want to ask you about Congressman Arrington mentioning that he would like to see former President Trump and presidential candidate Trump be the speaker. What's your reaction to that? Do you agree?
Well, President Trump has already said he's totally focused on his election, and that's what he's got to be doing. Look, he is the leader of this party for one reason. He fights for the American people. And that's the reason that people want to see him, because we need a fighter. We need a good conservative person in the chair but I think we've got a lot of talented people, and I hope we come to a good decision in the Speaker of the House.
Do you think the rules need to change for the next speaker so that whoever that next speaker is can't be so easily removed as Speaker McCarthy was this time.
Well, you're talking about what they call the Jeffersonian motion. It's been in place for over 200 years in this government. So this is a very traditional, very historical motion that has served us well over the years. And I will tell you, I don't think it ought to change. I think it is what this country was started with, and I think it has served us well. I see no reason to change it.
And just to be clear, we're talking about the fact that one member of Congress can bring a vote to vacate the chair.
That's right. But remember, that's one person can bring the motion to vacate. There were more than one person that participated in this, and I think the 8 felt that that was the only way they were going to get their legitimate concerns addressed. Personally, I don't think you make deals with Democrats. I don't think that's a good governing model. But the motion to vacate is very historic, very traditional, from the founding of our nation, Thomas Jefferson.
Do you think that this effort has weakened the Republican case in the sense of, you mentioned all of the problems that you have with the Biden administration. Does all of this drama distract from that?
Well, we can walk and chew gum at the same time, Jack. And I think we will. The investigations into the Biden crime family will continue. I have no doubt about that. The only thing that it's distracting from, that it's delaying, is the passing of the appropriations bills, because I would have liked to have done more this week, but we're not going to. But I will tell you also, this is what we're seeing here. This is a microcosm of a movement across this nation that we are seeing. I talk to members all the time. I talk to leaders who are out from DC around the nation, and there is a movement, I think, of frustration with the federal government. Now, you can pick your issue. It can be inflation. It can be government spending. It can be the border. It can be fear of the federal government, the 18 armored vehicles coming up, knocking in your door in the middle of the night and dragging you out half dressed. But there is a movement across America of people just frustration and anger with the federal government. And I think that movement is going to largely define how we move forward.
I wanted to ask you about your vote last week against a spending plan, along with 20 other Republicans, that conservative supporters said provided an 8% cut in domestic spending and more controls over the border than ever before. And so I'm wondering, why was that? Why did you make that vote?
Well, I am certainly all for strong border enforcement. But when you talk about the border enforcement, the border elements of that CR, there is no hope that the Biden administration, the lawless Biden administration, is ever going to execute any enforcement on the southern border. We see it today. We have the laws in place to protect our southern border. The Biden administration doesn't execute any of them, and it's the executive branch. That is their job. So I wanted a shorter period of time, because this town, I've learned, only operates under pressure. We don't do anything unless there's pressure. So the 30 days would have been too long to pressure us to continue to do our job in the appropriations bills. So CR is not a way to run a business. But there have been 130 continuing resolutions, CRs, since the last time this Congress actually passed the appropriation bills in the period of time that by law we're supposed to. 130 since then. So the CR is not a way to do business. I want to get us back to regular order where we pass appropriation bills on time. Let's just take a son or a daughter. They get homework in January, and it's due in September, at the end of September. Well, they get to the middle of September and they haven't done their homework. Do you give them another month to do their homework? Do you give them another 2 months, another 45 days? That's the analogy. We need to get back to passing those bills as the law requires.
But what was your alternative, though? I mean, that was realistic.
Shorter CR. A shorter CR to force us to do our job. As I say, pressure is the only thing this town responds to. If you give too much leeway, this town just uses the time available. And
as
by the way, Jack, we had passed 3 bills in 4 days. So we know we can get them done if you'll just get them through committee and bring them to the floor.
As you mentioned, you've got less than 40 days now for this continuing resolution. And so I'm wondering, what do you think is going to be the key to, because you don't support the CRs, the continuing resolutions, you support passing the rest of the legislation and then getting it passed in the Senate as well. So how do you think that's going to happen given the reality that is the House right now?
Well, everyone is talking about the big bad omnibus at the end of the year, where we crunch together all the bills because the Senate or the House hasn't passed them. So they crunch them all together in one big bill. It's not defined at all. It's just one big bill. You may remember last December, Nancy Pelosi passed $1.7 trillion in an omnibus. Nobody wants that. So I think that's the next pressure. Once we get through the speaker vote, we're going to be more focused so that we don't go to an omnibus. And that is the worst case when we go to an omnibus at the end of the year. But I will tell you, the word on the street is that Ukraine, the Senate is going to ask for somewhere on the border, on the level, $100 billion for Ukraine. $100 billion. That's unfathomable. And what we ought to be all about is securing our border before we send $100 billion to Ukraine. There are some estimates they might ask for more than $100 billion, but in any case, it's unthinkable.
And my last question to you is this, and I appreciate your time, Congressman, and that is, as far as getting these bills passed, do you think that once the House, the Republicans select their speaker, do you think that pressure is going to be on that speaker? Is that going to be part of this process, at least when it comes to your vote, on making sure whoever you vote for and whoever gets this job feels the pressure to get this done?
The Texas delegation, the Republicans, at our lunch today, we heard from 3 of the candidates. Every one of the 3 said exactly that. They will be focused on getting the appropriations bills passed. So absolutely, I think everybody understands we've got to get her done.
And who are those 3, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm not going to name them. I will just tell you they were all very accomplished leaders, and we were very glad to hear from them.
Congressman Keith Self, Republican of McKinney, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Jack.
We also spoke with Democratic Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett of Dallas.
So I voted that way simply because we need a speaker that is a speaker for the entirety of the House, that understands the importance of building real relationships and acknowledging when it's time to actually work across the aisle. Democrats worked really hard to make sure that we could keep the government open. All Democrats except for one voted to keep the government open for the 45-day continuing resolution that was passed. McCarthy, on the other hand, blamed the Democrats for the fact that we were heading towards a shutdown and completely ignored the fact that over 90 of his members voted against it and actually wanted to shut the government down. He also showed that he could not be trusted with making an agreement with our president. We shouldn't have been here because my president decided that he would engage in conversations about the budget as it relates to the debt ceiling. And those are 2 completely different things, but he did it anyway. So you know what? Honestly, we just want an honest broker. Even if you're telling us we're not going to do anything, at least be honest about it. And we couldn't find that in McCarthy.
So let me ask you, were there conversations that you were part of or that you heard of where Republican members of Congress were asking Democrats to save McCarthy's job and to keep him in place?
So no Republicans asked me. They probably knew where I would stand. But as a member of the leadership team for the House Democrats, I can tell you that McCarthy did not talk to Democratic leadership as well. He just thought that it was going to magically happen and he would magically be saved. That's not how you govern. And that's honestly not how you count And I do want to remind people, I know that Matt Gaetz is an easy target and everyone's blaming Matt Gaetz or they're blaming the 8, or even the Republicans want to blame the Democrats. But at the end of the day, this is a rule that was changed by McCarthy. This is what he decided he would do in order to seek his speakership. He could have stood his ground, as many before him have, and not allowed so much power to be emboldened to just one person. He made his bed and now he's laying in it.
Let me ask you about that rule, because I know that has been historically the rule. Speaker Pelosi changed it and Democrats changed it. And do you think it should go back to that so that more members, it's a higher bar. You need more members to call for a vacating of the chair?
I absolutely believe if you are going to govern in such a tight majority, it's probably in your interest to make sure that there's at least a coalition that can bring this. It's my understanding that the minority party can't bring it. So it can only be brought by the majority party in the first place. So it's not any one member. No Democrat could have brought it if they wanted to bring it. I probably would not do it if I was the speaker, simply because it's a disruption, as we see now. We absolutely have yet another deadline for keeping the government open. And, McCarthy said that there were personality issues that he struggled with within his caucus. And he feels as if this is more personality driven than policy driven. I don't know. I've not been a part of those conversations, but you have a lot of different personalities in Congress. And so I do think that it's disruptive in a time in which we honestly can't afford to be disruptive. And if I were speaker, I never would have gone for it. And going forward, I know that it's a rule that the Republicans want changed. But I don't know if they will get it changed, because they still have to build a consensus across the aisle, a place that seemingly they don't want to go.
So let me ask you, do you think that this change in leadership is going to help Democrats or hurt Democrats?
I think that we net nothing. I don't think it's a net gain. I don't think it's a net loss. Because right now, it's not necessarily just McCarthy. I mean, people are describing the Republicans that are currently in control in the House as the chaos caucus. And it's not just the 8. I mean, I'm going to be perfectly honest with you and tell you that there were other members that did not want to vote for McCarthy either, that did vote for him, and they voted for him because they felt like they were going to need his help with fundraising for their elections, because they're facing some pretty tough elections. But to be clear, it was more than 8 people that did not want McCarthy. And so I think that they have a lot of turmoil, and this is only brought that turmoil back to the surface, as we saw with the 15 rounds that it took for McCarthy to get there in the first place. I honestly don't anticipate that we will really get to where the American people need us to get to until we have our elections that are coming up and end up hopefully with a new majority in the Democrats. Because one thing's for sure, we're a big tent party. We have a lot of different opinions. But one thing that we always do is we focus in on the people first. And you've not seen shutdowns under Democratic leadership. That has only happened under Republican leadership. It is a really sad state of affairs, but I think that it is clear and it is transparent of where the current elected officials on that side stand. And I think that they're going to be in for a reckoning.
Let me ask you, there are 3 candidates who've been mentioned so far. You've got Steve Scalise, the House Majority Leader. You've got the chair of the House Judiciary Committee, Jim Jordan of Ohio, Kevin Hern of Oklahoma, who chairs the Republican Study Committee. Do you have a preference if you're going to have any Republican speaker?
I don't have a preference, but I can tell you that I absolutely think some people have a better shot at gaining the support of the Republican caucus than others. I think if someone really wanted to be smart and wanted to focus on governing, they probably should take a candidate who's in a Biden whatever district. I mean, I say whatever because everybody's kind of in different kind of Biden +5, Biden +10. They should probably take someone that's in a stance in which they need to show that they can work across the aisle we're not going to get there. They have a 4-seat majority right now, and the Senate is democratically controlled, as well as the presidency is a Democrat. So you can't get far right bills passed that are doing these crazy cuts that no one can survive with. So, I mean, it just doesn't make sense. You need someone that understands that they need to work across the aisle. And honestly, my vote will continually be for Speaker Jeffries, who will become the speaker sooner, hopefully rather than later. And honestly, if you were really trying to be strategic, we don't have the numbers to pass all of the legislation that we would want to get passed in the House anyway. If there was a Speaker Jeffries, we would always have to go and work with them to get anything done because we don't have the numbers. But you know what? One thing is for sure. Jeffries would always know how many members of his caucus he could deliver. He also would be an honest broker. And honestly, there's a lot of members of the Republican caucus, they don't trust the majority of the people that are running. We know that Jim Jordan won't make it. He just won't. He will not be the consensus builder. I'm sure the 8 would love to vote for him, but he's not the guy that's going to make it. Scalise has potentially a chance of making it. But no matter who's in that seat, if they choose not to work with Democrats, they are potentially facing the same fate that McCarthy faced.
And let me ask you one other question about this entire situation. And you're concerned about, because now we've got what, less than 40 days for the next potential shutdown. How confident are you that there will be spending bills passed? Because Republicans I spoke with said they want spending bills passed, and so that they're not having to rely on these continuing resolutions.
I'm gonna keep it clean. They're being a little less than honest, is how I will say that. Here's the deal. They've had over 9 months to pass spending bills, and they've not done it. So if you couldn't get it done in over 9 months, I'm not really the most optimistic that you're going to get it done now. And to be clear, what they're passing is nothing more than messaging bills. Yesterday I said I never thought that I would agree with Matt Gaetz, right? But Matt Gaetz made it plain. They're not passing bills that they ever anticipate will actually go into law. They know that they won't go into law. They just want to talk about it. And so that's not what it's going to take to keep the government open. I mean, to have a backdoor conversation with a Republican member as I'm fighting for full funding for agriculture, not just because we need to make sure that those that are reliant upon SNAP benefits have the money that they need to make sure that they can eat in this time of inflation, but also for our farmers. We know that we've got farmers all throughout the state of Texas. I have been fighting for full funding in agriculture, and I've talked to other Republicans on the Ag Committee, Republicans that agreed to vote for the Ag bill. And they said, we know it's terrible, we don't want it, but we'll just let the Senate fix it. I mean, that's where we are. They're passing bills that they know will never pass. They just want to blame Democrats and say, well, Democrats were unreasonable, so we had to do this. I honestly need them to grow up and be realistic, talk about the fact that we're dealing with record inflation, and therefore we have to make the adjustments in how we fund things such as agriculture. They don't want to have the real conversations about the fact that we are missing the workforce that we need in the federal government to make sure that people are getting their Social Security, that they're getting their IRS checks. We don't have the manpower, so therefore you have to fund this. Or even when we start talking about the border, you have to make sure that I'm the one that's talked to border agents. I don't know how many of them have. We've got to make sure that the funding is there because no one wants to take these jobs. And as it relates to the immigration issues, if you have immigration courts that are overrun and we're not giving them the funding, then we are basically on a hamster wheel, literally just going in circles and blaming people instead of looking within and recognizing that we have to fully fund the government if we want the government to work.
Last question I had, and that was this report that came out about the U.S. Department of Homeland Security Secretary Mayorkas saying that they need to build barriers down in Starr County in Texas along in the Rio Grande Valley. What do you make of that? Because that seems to be a change from the Biden administration's policy, that they now want to build some kind of barrier, whether it be a wall, in Starr County.
Yeah, so I would not attribute this to the administration. What I will attribute to the administration is them making good on what was passed into law. So this is funding, and this is another good point to make, Jack. Most people think if the government does a bill today, then tomorrow it's fixed. That is not true. We, as of right now, we've been talking about our appropriations. So I believe it was FY19 appropriations in which this money was appropriated. When that money was appropriated, basically it was appropriated only for this. So unlike our governor, who will take money and reshuffle it around when he's not supposed to, this is exactly what it was appropriated for. And so the administration is not trying to break the law or do something unscrupulous by sending this money somewhere else. It's what it was appropriated for. And it's my understanding that that came out of the Trump administration. So I believe that it came out of 18's kind of fight for the 19 budget. And that's what was signed into law by Trump. And so therefore, they're not trying to take the money and do something else with it.
Is it an acknowledgement that the border wall is needed, at least down in that particular area, to keep migrants from coming into Texas?
I don't think that it's an acknowledgement of that. I think it's an acknowledgement of an administration that will follow through on appropriations. This money was set aside for that by the Trump administration. Now, I could see the Trump administration doing whatever they wanted to do with money and worrying about being maybe sued about it later. But this administration has decided to make good on what Trump signed into law. And that's what the money was appropriated for. I don't think it means anything more or less. I will tell you, though, that if you've ever heard the stories of those that have come, there are those that have lost their lives on the trek. There are those that have almost lost their lives on the trek. Or my colleague Veronica Escobar has talked about the savagery that has taken place as it relates to women and children as they have made this trek. When you are willing to risk your life, I can guarantee you that a wall isn't going to be the obstacle that's going to stop you. But what we need to do is make sure that if someone is actually seeking asylum and has an actual asylum case, that we get that processed. It doesn't make sense that it's a 7-year wait until we get through asylum cases. By then, we don't know what the status was or what your status was 7 years ago. It is too difficult. And the final point that I'll make is something that we've not talked about, but it's this idea that American dollars should only fund things in America. I need to be clear. When it comes to foreign policy and immigration issues, we need to do what we've always done really, really well. And that means that we support those modern day democracies that are struggling and we help to stabilize them. If we have areas that are stabilized and there's not all of the turmoil going on, then we can be put in a situation where people won't be looking to leave their homes, but instead they will stay where they are. That is what it looks like to protect America. It is spending our dollars in a very smart way on foreign policy. It is also investing in those that are doing the work, whether it's at the border or whether it's in the immigration courts or whether it's somewhere in the immigration cycle in general, not just the courts.
But you agree with, because Republicans said that President Biden was very much opposed to a wall or some kind of barrier along, people said they don't work. And so now that they've requested this, because there's an urgent need down there, what do you say to Republicans to say, see, we told you?
Once again, I don't think that this is a matter of bowing down to the Republican way. I don't think that anything about the data has changed. This is simply about, this is what was signed into law and honoring that. There's nothing else we can do with that money because this is what it was appropriated for.
Democratic Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett of Dallas, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Absolutely.
We will take a break, and when we come back, our interview with State Representative Retta Bowers, who's now running in the Democratic primary for the 32nd Congressional District. Eye on Politics on CBS News Texas. We'll be right back. State Representative Retta Bowers has added her name to the growing list of Democrats running for the soon-to-be-open 32nd Congressional District seat. We asked her about her priorities and why she's running. Democratic State Representative Retta Bowers, you are running for Congress now in the 32nd District.
Yes.
And so thank you so much. I wanted to know, why are you running? What is the basis for your campaign?
Thank you, Jack. The basis for this campaign and the reason that I'm running is really to provide leadership that has been proven in the State House, that will make sure that people are taken care of, that will provide a voice in Washington, really carrying the voices of the people to Washington to make sure that they have the things they need. And I want to be able to bring the pragmatic approach that I always have. That's one of the things that I really took pride in. And I think in the State House, my colleagues for sure noticed that I was going to vote my district always, that I took the people's voices there with every vote and would not sway. I think one of the things that definitely gave me pause is because I was trying to think more about self. My mission has always been service over self and the people over politics. And so once I started to open myself up to really what I a lot of times would even ask my staff is, what are the people saying? And when I got home from the regular session, my constituency and supporters all across the region, whether they were community leaders, electeds, or just regular citizens, everyday voters, were coming up to me, reaching out to me in all kinds of ways and asking me to do this. And when I came to the realization of what the people were saying, is that they certainly were asking me to run. I try to not think about what people in Washington were saying, because it's what the people have been saying that's really mattered the most. And this is what got me to this decision. Once I put service and the community over self, I really saw that there was a need for someone like me to come to the table to make sure that I had a seat at the table and could bring their voices and stand up for them.
I wanted to ask you, because this was a change, right? Because at the initial offset, you said you weren't going to run, you were going to run for re-election for your seat in the House, in the State House. And so I'm wondering, aside from the pressure, from people in the community, what was it in your head that said, because you're giving up your State House seat to run for Congress? And so I'm wondering, what was the spark that got you over that hump, if you will, to make that change? Because you're running in a very crowded field now.
Sure, thank you for that. And it was a lot to think about, as you said, a crowded playing field, so much being at stake, whether that's giving up my seat and the people's seat, certainly, that I sit in and serve in. But, being so close to being vested in the House and just all the work that I had done there, I had to really, really think about it. And there were some conversations that were had with community leaders, former and current members of Congress, that said, hey, we really think that you could win this and you need to really strongly consider it. And I gave every reason why I shouldn't. Every reason why I shouldn't. And I saw some strong reasons coming back to me every time. But I will say that really there was a constituent and supporter that said to me, if you get in, it will make my choice so much easier. My decision will be easier. And I took all these things into consideration. I did take a little bit of time to close the voices out. I wanted to close all the voices out so I could clearly think about it. And there was a day that my soul really said yes, that get ready for the type of service at a higher level that you will be able to bring and provide. And if this is being asked of you, whether that's from a higher being, the community leaders, people from Washington, whomever, then you have to consider it and really, really look at making a decision to say yes.
And one of the members of Congress, or former members of Congress, I think you're alluding to, is Congresswoman Eddie Bernice Johnson.
Absolutely.
And so I'm wondering what impact did her, did she reach out to you? And I'm wondering what kind of impact that may have had, her conversation with you, on your decision.
You know, when I talked and spoke with her, I certainly said, I am considering this, but I just want to hear from you. And I think that it settled all, if there were any barriers there when I called her, because I did call her. I said, I am considering this, but I want to hear from you. And it was that statement that gave her an open door, surely, to share. And I will say that throughout the summer, it was probably the better part of 2 months that she just poured into me and explained to me why. And every time I tried to tell her no, she certainly, she pulled back, and then she said, but if you look at it this way. So she clearly was trying to make me understand that there's a real great chance that I could win.
So there were multiple conversations.
Multiple.
And why do you think you are the best? As I said, this is a very crowded field. What makes you the best candidate, and what do you believe is your path to victory in the primary?
I do believe that as I represent House District 113, I represent everybody in the district, even those that may not agree with me. As you know, the community work we did with flipping this district, everybody wasn't with me at first, but one thing that supporters and constituents have told me along the way is even if we don't agree with you, you listen. I think that is one thing that I bring to the table, that I am going to listen to you, I'm going to hear you, and I'm going to bring your concerns to the table. I know also that I have an ability to remove myself from the equation and realize that just as this run for Congress is bigger than me, that a lot of times those issues that we're tackling are bigger than me.
And you entered the race last month, and I'm wondering, how concerned are you that your late entry puts you at a disadvantage when it comes to raising money? Because you've got announcements just in the last couple of days. Julie Johnson, another state representative from our area, she's announced that she raised over $300,000 in the third quarter, bringing her total to over $715,000. And just this morning, Brian Williams, another candidate, announced that in the third quarter he raised over $350,000 for a total of $716,000. So how concerned are you that you're behind when it comes to fundraising and your ability to get the message out?
Well, that is something that you have to think about. But really where I try to keep my focus is on what I am going to do and what I'm committed to do. And so I realize, and people in this community may know, that I've never stepped back from a tough fight. So coming in late, thousands of dollars having been raised prior to my entry are all things that I had to consider, but I had to dig in and be ready and willing and commit to raising the money that I can. So I'm going to continue to raise the money that I can. I realize that I don't have to outraise them, because if you recall, in previous cycles, I've been outraised and outspent, and I've won. So I have to raise enough money to make sure that I can get my message out. And I think from what you just said, it is about raising enough. So I'm going to definitely do my due diligence to bear down as I have from the moment I started letting people know that I was committed to doing this and dedicated to running a clean and strong and viable race to doing that. And so that's where I am with it. I mean, it's not something that I can ignore, and I won't, but I certainly know that I have to just do my best.
So let's talk about policy. What are your 3 top priorities if you are to be elected?
I think they're largely what they have been. I think one thing that we do have to look at is reducing cost. When it comes to prescription drugs, something that I've worked on and supported on here in the State House, but also making sure that there's affordable health care, making sure that we look at inflation, and so bringing costs down all around. I do think that we have to look at education, making sure that it's affordable. We're going to have to look at the fact that student loans, families are faced with that, and so those are some of the issues that I'm definitely going to be looking at. But certainly going in, just as I did as a freshman in the State House and wanting to work alongside my colleagues. I will say I went in as a sponge and as a student, and I learned all the way through. Not sure that I learned nearly enough or learned it all, but I've been told from a sitting Congresswoman, Retta, you will learn just as you did at the State House. So, when I look at it, it's really going to be really making sure we've got health care, we've got an economy that is strong, we've got education that is affordable and gives people the quality of life that they deserve.
And you're talking about higher education.
Absolutely.
So what do you think that Congress can do? Because you mentioned loans and stuff like that. Obviously, there was a lot of controversy surrounding the president's decision to forgive loans, and the courts, they're not going to allow it. But I'm wondering, what is the solution to that? I mean, people sign these loans, they know what they're doing. So what's your solution?
That's a hard question, because I, like many other families, my family faces the same thing with student loans. We've had 2 children go through college. And when you look at loan forgiveness, I mean, that gave people in America great hope. It really did. I can say that. But certainly I think people want to know that any solution that we can come up with, that it's a real promise, and it's a real promise that will be kept. I think right now, when you look at the way things are, people have been strung along. And they're not getting the answers that they need. So I am going to be willing to go in and work alongside my colleagues and to make sure that if we can do something great in if it is loan forgiveness, that will be the solution that's given to these families. Because right now, everything, as you said, it continues to be up in the air.
Inflation, what do you think Congress can do to bring prices down? I mean, it has eased, but some prices at the grocery store, yes, they're still expensive. I mean, maybe in the middle, of the store, not necessarily produce, but everything else. And people are very unhappy about that. When you look at the polls, people are very upset about, how expensive things are. Mm-hmm. You're looking at mortgage rates going up. Gas has come down, but just the overall cost of living seems to be higher for people.
And that, I believe, stems from the supply chain issues that we had. And I do believe that we are just going to have to certainly look at investing more in our small businesses. I think that small business owners are having a real hard time, and when we look at what happened as we went through the pandemic and the supply chain issues were certainly there, we haven't truly recovered from any of that. And I do think that we will have to look at how we do that, and I'm willing to work with my colleagues to try to find those answers.
Let's talk about the border. As you know, this has been a huge issue here in the state of Texas. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are as it relates to just the situation, the federal government's response, and what you think the solution is there.
Well, I will say this. I currently serve on Homeland Security and Public Safety and the Speaker's Select Committee for Community Safety. I have taken a trip to the border and certainly will take more if necessary. I do believe that we as a state have to do better by the immigrants that are seeking asylum and make sure that our borders are not just left open, but certainly there to receive these people and to help them. This is one thing that I asked about on the many border trips that were taken. Whenever I was there, I certainly talked to them about the inhumane acts and what was happening. Now, with the buoys there, I certainly think those have to be removed. I don't believe that it is building a barrier. I do believe that we have to be more open to helping these people enter the state, find safety, find quality of life, and all those things. So I do believe with the federal response that they're certainly trying to help in those ways, but I've always wished that as a state we could figure out how to work together on this issue.
If you're going to Congress, it becomes, a lot of people say Congress hasn't acted and that Congress needs to act. Certainly the president has said that, past presidents have said it, and yet there's really nothing that's happened. So I'm wondering, what do you think the federal government's response should be?
It's a tough situation when you think about immigrants being bused, sent to other areas. And I don't want to say that I believe the federal government needs to come in and do something, because I certainly believe we need to address it here as a state first. But if we can't, then that is when there should be a federal response. And I think when you look at it, people aren't happy with the way we're responding to it here in Texas, right? So at that point, I do believe that we may have to have some kind of federal response.
So you don't believe the federal government is the first government that needs to act?
When you look at the state of Texas, those are our borders, right? So we should be helping people that are coming to our borders. We are not doing that, and so that is the only reason I believe that the federal government need to get involved.
And so let me ask you about the speaker being ousted. This all has taken place just in the last day or so. With Kevin McCarthy. What'd you make of that?
I have been so much trying to focus on my race that I was really trying not to pay attention to it, but I had to. It actually made me question the type of things that happen in government and with taxpayer dollars and what we're doing. But I will say this, we know that nothing is impossible, and we shouldn't think that these kinds of things will or will not happen. But I certainly had to think about going there, because I'll tell you this, when I came to the State House, I wondered and hoped that I would find more people that were willing to stand up for people like myself. there, and I did find them. I have had a chance to go to Washington since I've announced. I do believe that there are some good people in Washington that do care about the people that they serve. So I don't think that they're all like that, that would allow things like that to happen. I just had to believe that this is the right time for me to step up to seek higher office and to run for Congress and to serve at a higher level. So that's really where I was with it, because you have to know, with running a race at this pace and coming in as I have at this time, I have to focus on what's happening in the race.
Let me ask you about just government spending, because they passed the continuing resolution to prevent the shutdown over the weekend.
Yes.
And so, but this is going to be coming up in November again, unless they can pass bills to prevent, a potential shutdown again. And so I'm wondering, where are you on federal government spending? I know that the national debt is now over $33 trillion. So what's your thought on that, and where spending needs to be?
Well, it would, when you've got me at the possibility of a shutdown. It really would be a terrible shame for something like that to happen when we look at what it could mean to those federal workers that would lose their paychecks and not be able to provide for their families. So, when we look at federal spending, we definitely don't want to be in a deficit, right? So I just would hope that the federal government would take into consideration all the people that it would hurt, and the direction that we're going with spending. Because as you mentioned, where we are today is not where we want to be. And I certainly would hope that they would stop putting, politics of it over the people that we serve.
My last question to you is about foreign policy, and one of the key questions nowadays is continuing funding for the Ukraine's response to Russia's attack and ongoing attacks. Where are you on that?
There again, we're talking about spending. I do believe that we have to take care of our own. I do believe that it is necessary to help others, but I do believe that we have to take care of our own, our borders, our country, before spending in other areas. I'm not going to say that I don't believe that we shouldn't support Ukraine, but I do believe we have to look at matters here in the U.S. before we continue spending elsewhere.
As we sit here today, there's going to be another special session in the State House, and you're still there, of course. And so I wanted to ask you about one of the key issues that's going to be coming up, and that is school choice and taxpayer-financed education savings accounts that would allow some public school students to attend private school by receiving some state tax dollars. Where are you on that?
Well, I've always supported public education, and so I'm always going to be a no when it comes to vouchers. I do believe that with the couple of school districts I have left in the district, I've talked to my superintendents, and it just wouldn't be good when it comes to the basic allotment and what is provided for those students to the school district. The voucher itself will not be enough for a family to provide a private school education. And one of my school districts, it has choice of school already. So this is not about choice. It is, to me, about defunding public education. And I do believe when we look at our education system here in Texas, we have to fund it properly. There were some promises that we made, back in the 86th legislative session. And we have to make sure that we are coming through and making sure that that is sustainable. You know, what we promised the people and in education, we have to come through with those promises. We certainly didn't look nearly enough at teacher pay raises, and I just want to make sure that our teachers, active and retired, are taken care of. So I hope you can tell that I do feel strongly about it, that this isn't the answer.
The governor has campaigned on this issue, saying that he believes that it will, when you have education savings accounts, that it will make public schools even stronger by providing this competition. What do you say to that?
I don't believe that is the truth at all. I just don't see how providing a voucher and an education savings account is giving to public education. And we know for a fact that that will not be what happens. And I've talked to my superintendents, and they've said that it will not help even with enrollment, with students staying in those classrooms. So, and when you look at the possibility of an average single mom of 3 saying, I could just start my own charter school, there's all sorts of examples that would really work against public education as it stands today in Texas.
The other thing I wanted to ask you about is the potential for Speaker Dade Phelan to vacate the chair, if you will. How concerned are you that some Republicans in the House are going to try to remove him from the speakership?
I certainly don't think that is the direction that we need to go as a body. I will just say that. I think one of the things that I know we have to get away from is the divisiveness and the division. There's so many different groups and organizations, factions within the body, but we've got to come together, and we shouldn't go back to try to get the speaker. There's one thing that always kind of struck me as I've served in the House. So many people saying Texas is not like Washington. We just saw what happened in Washington. You mentioned it today as we sat here and talked with the Speaker of the House. That is the last thing that we need to go back to, when we need to be going back to deal with and to fight against vouchers. We need to be fighting to make sure we're properly funding education, and that we go there with teachers and students in mind, not about ousting our leader.
Do you think that would throw the House into chaos if that happens?
I think it's a strong possibility that that is what would happen, but that's the last thing we need to go there for. If the call is about education, one thing that I've always said too is that it deserves a real conversation, deserves a real debate on the floor. Let's talk about it. I think that's the kind of approach that I bring when it comes to talking about the issues, really wanting to hear and listen to each other. And I just don't think that we need to be headed back for a third special session to talk about ousting our leader. I think this is definitely has to be about the issue of funding education, public education properly.
Democratic State Representative Retta Bowers of Garland, running for Congress. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
That's all for Eye on Politics this week. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Jack Fink. I hope to see you again next week. You're watching CBS News Texas.